Hi, Jenny. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Can't complain. It's Friday.
Right? We're all just bracing for the big windstorm or whatever the heck will happen this
Yeah.
afternoon.
So I was telling Kysha, I'm actually in South Carolina right now, but I was talking to my mom and it's like 60 degrees there, but it's supposed to snow tonight. So I'm not sure
Oh,
what
there's
is
a heck
going
of a
on in
lot.
Iowa.
Yeah. Same. I don't think we know either. So we'll just take whatever comes.
Exactly. Exactly. Hi, Laurel. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am well. I'm well. I'm Joy. I'm the executive director of One Cedar Valley. I know Jenny,
Yeah,
but I don't know if we had the opportunity to met, but thank you for joining us today.
no, we appreciate the invite, and I'm with Community Bank and Trust here in town. So,
Oh, nice, Stacy.
yeah,
Stacy
yeah.
Bentley. I love Stacy.
I serve on our DEI committee here at the bank, and then also larger inclusion committee. So we thought that your information that you're going to share might be useful to both. So,
Perfect, perfect. So Kysha is actually a Waterloo native, but it is going to be really, really good information. We are so proud of the work she's doing. It's amazing. And it's one of those things where like I found her corporation and then I was like, Kysha.
good. Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, and we'll get started. I mean, I know it's Friday, so right around noon, we'll go ahead and get started. And I'll just do a brief, just say welcome to Kysha and thank you guys for joining us today on behalf of One Cedar Valley. We do record just because if other individuals, we want as many people as possible to be able to benefit from this information. So, and we'll send it out as well. And so that way, if there's somebody back at your organization that wasn't able to make it this morning, afternoon now, we'll make sure we go ahead and send out the information as well. And I was telling Kysha that, in the future, I would love for her even to come and do something with us in person. And she assured me she's open to it as long as it's before October. Because our weather kind of changes then. Hi, Chris.
Hey Joey, what's up?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you this Friday?
Well, I'm very warm and
Ah,
I'm starving, so I'm going to be stuffing my face.
that's a duality. You're
Yeah,
warm, yet you're starving. We're
yeah,
excited about being warm. The
yep,
starving part, not so much, right?
yep. I'm working on it though. That's why I got my camera up. I apologize.
All right, no worries, no worries. All right. Welcome, Teresa and Susan. How are you?
Wonderful, thank you. So happy to be here and looking forward to hearing the presentation.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. It's Friday, and I know there's a lot of things going on, and so we're excited. We appreciate Kysha taking her time to be here and tell us a little bit. And like I said, Kysha, I'll do just a quick overview of you and what you are in about 1 minute here, and then we'll go ahead and dive in. Hi, Chelsea. How are you?
I'm good. How's everyone doing?
Good, good. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
This is going to be a good one. I love the ones that I can already tell are going to have things that you can look at from a holistic lens when you're thinking about what you organizational, but also from a community-wide level. And all of you here play different roles. So I'm really, really excited about Kysha's work, some of the things she's seen and how we can dig in. And I love that we do these in like a small group format because it represents an opportunity to really have some conversation and get some questions answered too. So that's awesome. All right. Well, it's 12 o'clock on the dot, and I just want to be so respectful of everybody's time. I'm Joy Briscoe for those who I haven't officially met yet, and I have the privilege of being the executive director of One Cedar Valley. And One Cedar Valley is a consortium of business leaders, nonprofits, service providers that are basically focused on removing barriers to meaningful employment. And we do that a multitude of ways. We don't just say, here's a job opportunity, make the best of it. We actually look at how we can make the community more inclusive and more supporting to make sure that the community that embraces our workforce is actually helping people be prepared to be the best authentic selves in their workspace. So it's not just a job. We look at it from a holistic perspective. And so I'm so excited to have Kysha Wright Frazier here this morning, President and CEO of Corporation for a Skilled Workforce, because her organization speaks to exactly what we're trying to do. I mean, she works at the intersection of workforce, community building, education, policy, all of the things. And so a little bit about Kysha Wright Frazier is, as President and CEO, Kysha Wright Frazier directs the organization's overall strategic direction, sustains organizational leadership, and steers CSW's culture and racial equity and inclusion practices. Kysha engages with national, state, and local policy and practice leaders as part of CSW's efforts to provoke change in public policy and investment in workforce development, ensuring the organization's work is effectively designed to carry out CSW's missions, visions, and values. And so with all that being said, Kysha, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're excited to talk to you today.
Thanks so much, Joy. Thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for joining in the conversation today. As I was very happy to get the invitation from Joy, always happy to help anyone from hometown. And so anytime you want to ask and anytime you want to invite me again, I'm happy to do that. So we're going to start with a couple of slides, and I don't want to get folks scared. They're just a couple. I thought I would give some backdrop and context to who CSW is and a little bit more about me, because our work is pretty, can be complex at times. So I thought some visuals might help. So if Joy can get up the slides here, I'll walk through those just for a couple of minutes and then we'll get into some more discussion. All righty. So if we go to that second slide about CSW, to tell you a little bit more about us. So we're a national workforce policy and research organization, and we catalyze changes, Joy mentioned, in a number of sectors, including education and focusing on the labor market systems. And then we connect with policymakers and create innovative practices to increase economic mobility, particularly for people of color and others historically excluded from success. We've been in existence for 32 years. We are headquartered in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Though, as I'll show, we have staff across the country, coast to coast and north to south. We focus on creating scalable improvements in worker skills, lifelong learning, and job quality. We collaborate with change makers to develop strategies, identify evidence to inform strategies, and build the capacity of organizations to manage initiatives and evaluate the lessons learned. Our team on the next slide is, I just highlight our leadership team on the next slide. Yeah, so CSW has had some reorganization, not reorganization, but some structural changes in the last 2 years, I'd say, as a part of our journey in our internal cultural change. And so with that, the last 2 years ago, I became vice president. And then this year became the president and CEO of CSW. And then Travis Reed became our vice president last year, and Sherry Kavanaugh has been with the organization over 25 years. And so that rounds out our leadership team, and we do have a staff of 20 people. And the next slide will show you where we're located. So again, we've got staff from California all the way up to Massachusetts and New York. And I put the little star there just to reference it. I am from Waterloo, as Joy said. Born and raised on the east side of Waterloo, and now live right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. But our work has touched all 50 states through our 30 years, and we go deep into them, and happy to have that broader context of what's happening across the country. Next slide. Just to tell you a little bit about where our focus areas are, we focus in 5 main strategy areas, composed of competencies and credentials, federal, state, and local systems change, improving practices and outcomes, research and evaluation, and trauma and resilience at work. And I won't go into a lot of the next slides, but on the next slide, it just highlights some work of each of the teams. And I'll probably talk more about the work from this team in our conversation, because the credentials that people are able to earn and how we quantify learning is very important to the outcomes people have in the workplace and in the workforce in the market. So A couple of the projects we're doing nationally, I'd say if you're really interested in the credentialing, incremental credentialing movement, Credential As You Go is something to connect to. You can Google that and it'll pop up. We have separate branding for that, but that's an initiative that CSW is leading with Empire State University. Another really important piece I'll just highlight is with the state of Alabama, and we're looking to do this with additional states, is that we worked with their state departments to really think about industries of growth and how they talk about that work and what are the credentials and the necessary skills needed to enter into those jobs. And so we started to actually update and help employers redefine the actual job skills needed so that, again, more folks can enter into those workspaces and have opportunities for some good jobs. The next slide. I won't go into deep, but just highlight one here, piloting the ability to benefit work from our federal, state, and local systems change team. I think this is important work too, and we talk about access to good jobs, is that there are certain states we work with where graduation rates are very low, even just from high school. Iowa does a pretty good job of that than other states, but there are still issues in certain populations for graduation rate and at certain sections of the city. And so this is an effort to look at how do we give access to federal funding to provide access to a college education by providing funds if a person does not have a GED or a high school diploma. And so we're giving a track for those people to enter and gain 6 credits of college education through ability to benefit, leveraging promise funds that many states have or others associated promise funds, so that a person can access those funds, use them. After they've completed those 6 hours, they would be eligible for full Pell Grant funding. So again, some innovative things that we're looking at to provide access to increase skill development and better jobs. And we'll go to the next one. Improving practices and outcomes. That team works a lot within communities, particularly with community-based organizations. Again, as we talk about the ecosystem, it's job seekers, it's learners, it's employers, and there's community-based organizations who provide those supports. And so this team looks at how do community-based organizations, how can they perform their services better so they have better outcomes for the people that they serve. And so we've done this in a number of ways. One is our national kind of branded and trademark initiative called Workforce Benchmarking Network, where we bring cohorts of CBOs together to work through and come up with strategies using data as a real driver to those improvements and through a continuous improvement model. We also have a national survey attached to that any community service provider anywhere in the country can take. And if anybody wants that, I can share that link with you, Joy. And what it does is benchmark performance outcomes against similar organizations as theirs across the country. And that helps them, again, pinpoint where should I be focusing efforts and resources within my program. This strategy team also works a lot at with the various groups that are justice impacted and thinking about solutions and strategies to give access to get good jobs and employment for that particular population group. Next slide. Then our research and evaluation team, this is our 4th team, focuses just on that. We do a lot of state evaluations. We do a lot of workforce board evaluations, a number of other sector evaluations, but 2 that I just wanted to highlight. One piece here more in particular is to look at food systems in Michigan. And I thought this was relatable because it looks at a lot of agricultural careers, and we're looking at job lattices within the agricultural sector, which again, I know is a large sector in Iowa. So that work may be informative to some of you on the call. And then also just toolkits. Data is a driver behind a lot of our work, and you'll hear that from me lots of times today. But we don't want to be just someone that comes in and does a data piece or does some research. We want to make sure the folks in the community have the tools and the information to do it themselves. And that's where we see systems change occurring, when folks have the necessary information, tools, and resources to create their own path and make the changes for themselves. And so we've created a data toolkit for communities. And so again, that resource is on our website. And then our last team, and that next slide here, is our trauma and resilience at work. This is our newest team that a team member of ours really saw the need for it in the market. And she's correct that there is a lot of trauma workers are dealing with, learners are dealing with, also the people who support workers and learners, workers on the front line are dealing with. And so how do we address this head on so that people can thrive in the workplace, can advance, and also sometimes just take those first steps towards work. And so we've done some trainings at the state and as well as city levels, as well as with associations. And so some of those are just highlighted here. So racial equity and opportunity, just wanted to highlight how we view that at CSW. We believe that race should not be a predictor of social or economic outcomes for any person. And we're deeply committed to intentionally stimulating change in education and labor market systems to increase the upward mobility of workers, again, particularly those historically excluded from economic advancement. And this is a point of view that we were very focused in and intentionally lifting it, starting around 2018, 2019. And from there, we enacted a number of practices and things like that I'll share with you today, but just wanted to let you know, this is the frame of reference where we're coming from when we talk about racial equity and equality. So at CSW, I'm gonna catch up to where I'm at. Okay, we have integrated REI, and I'll just use that as an acronym now, in our org's culture. We have adopted a revised mission and set of values in 2019 that centers REI. And then we operate out of that lens. We've been able to deepen our commitment and creativity with so that every person can thrive. And so it's centered in our vision and our values. And that's something we had to do to go forward and really make this a focus of the work that we're going to do. And so why the focus on race? And we've got that. I know folks call it DEI, and that's the questions I know we're talking about today. It's centered around DEI. We have taken a stance to focus on race and racial equity and inclusion for a number of reasons. And it's not race exclusive, understanding that there are very many intersectionalities that occur and identities that occur for a person. But we also know that race, when we talk about a predictor of outcomes, is the focus, is the element, is the metric that predicts so many things for people, including life expectancy, education, the job they might have, the amount of money they'll earn, how they're impacted by the criminal justice system. So there are a number of reasons that race needs to be at the forefront. It's the elephant in the room sometimes, and we're going to talk about it. And so we center race as a focal point when we talk about diversity at CSW. And I just want to go back to that too. As you think about race, and I know a lot of my work is in a lot of other places, sometimes never home, but it brings me back to, and I know many of you have heard, like, do you grow up on the wrong side of the tracks? Folks have heard that. And if knowing you all are from Waterloo, Cedar Falls, I heard that all the time growing up. I grew up on the east side of Waterloo, graduated from East High. I know that when I went to the University of Iowa, and folks would say, "Where are you from?" And they say, "Oh, wow." Like, they're surprised that, that someone could matriculate and do well out of a certain section of town. And so when we, again, race is very, it predicts a lot of things in life in terms of where you live, even what people think about your skill sets and your abilities. And when you have that thinking, it causes a lot of segregation. So when you do have the east side versus west side, Cedar Falls versus Waterloo, there cause divide, and there's been a lot of white flight that does occur, folks going in the suburbs or rural areas, and that can shift patterns of both public and private investment and access to social capital. It drains that area, and this leads to racial inequalities, again, that are surfaced here in a lot of different ways. So I just wanted to just mention that, again, why race is so important to us in our work. This just gives you a little highlight of what's happening across the country in terms of median or average wealth for families. And there's great disparity. White families have the highest level of both median wealth at 182,000, and Black families' median wealth is less than 15% of white families, and at 24,000, and Hispanic families, the median wealth is 36,000. There's a great gap occurring there, and the questions are, you know, why does this continue to occur? It's not happenstance. Something is occurring within the systems that we just showed in the slide before. And again, if we take race away from that, you can't. It's a big factor. Even if you adjust for education, you'll see great disparities in earnings and income outcomes as well. So race is a very big factor in outcomes. The next slide. This shows, again, as we talk about generational wealth and what can happen for people generations ahead, in that there's less amount of stored wealth or access to funds for folks of color than white people. And so it's hard to set up and draw back from, and it's hard to do the pull the bootstraps metaphor when you don't have a lot of reserve to pull from. And so as you look at this data, it's just showing, you know, the amount of folks who have gotten inheritances. And again, that comes from generations of a head start as well. And then there's just a thing about how the college degrees by percent of parents in that last row as well. So again, a lot of this, it's generational effects that occur. And you hear the sayings, oh, that was so long ago in terms of slavery and things like that. But there are intentional policies that I'll talk about a little bit later put in place long after that, from Jim Crow to federal workplace policies, from the Fair Labor Standards Act, and a lot of other acts that were set, the GI Bill, that presumably were set up to help broad sweeps of people, but intentionally left out broad sweeps of people, again, based on race. So we can go to the next slide. Was that my last one? No. Okay. So worst states for Black Americans. I'm sure all of y'all have seen this. This is the latest one from February. They do this every year. I believe Iowa is like in the top 3 almost every year. And this hurts. This is where I still call home. And so you see that 3.6% of the state's population is Black, and in Waterloo, I'm pretty sure it's about 4 times as that, at least. And over 25% of Iowans are in federal or state correction facilities. So again, the interaction with the justice system looks a lot differently for people of color, particularly Black people in the state. And then there's the poverty rate differences, where it's about 3 times as much for white individuals within the state. Home ownership rates, great disparities there, again, about 3 times. And the unemployment rate, again, about 3 times. So questions about why is this occurring and what's our role in reducing those disparities and those outcomes for Black people in the state of Iowa. And almost my last slide. So racial equity and inclusion at CSW, just to go a little bit deeper. Back in 2018, as I stated, we started to make some org-wide changes, such as examining our wages across the organization and created set wage ranges. This meant also making some equitable increases or adjustments to some salaries. We examined our org structure, our goals for growth, and focused and created those strategies that I just talked about earlier, those 5 strategies. We want to make sure that we had the right people in place. We had the right skills to lead that work. And this meant ensuring we had an optimal candidate pool that reached beyond some of our traditional sources of the way that we recruited. Again, being an Ann Arbor-based company, we would get a lot of folks from the state of Michigan or from the University of Ann Arbor. As you saw on our map, we've changed that quite a bit. And we've created job profiles for each staff person based on the competencies performed for the positions and highlighted that in our job descriptions. And you'll note that, and I'll talk about this more, we focus on competencies and not degrees. And then we also hired and worked with a consultant to do some self-reflection and some REI competency development along with these organizational-wide changes. So, but these are 3 main pieces that were critical to us as we looked at how do we incorporate REI not just into the work we do externally, but within our practices and our organizational culture as well. My last slide is just to reflect and show these are 8 principles that we've developed that really lift up how we view incorporation REI into the work that we do. And so it's not that we have to say each element has to be a piece of the work, but we want to make sure that there are good components of that as we look at our work. And so incorporating constituent voice is a big one. As we do research and data collection, we want to make sure that we're not just talking to executive level people or a state person. We want to talk to the people on the ground who's affected. We always start with who's being impacted by this work, and we want to make sure that their voice is being highlighted and is a part of the solution. For example, with our Michigan Justice Fund, we actually hired a consultant who is somebody who recently got out of prison to be on that team to develop our research protocol, to help us with the interviews and the focus groups. Who better yet to come up with solutions than somebody who's actually just came out of that system. And so this is just a little highlight again of how we do our work, how we embed REI again into our approaches. And that's I just want to give that highlight and a little backdrop before we go on our conversation. Joy.
Perfect. And for everyone, if you are here today, I will make sure you get a copy of the slides. One awesome thing about Kysha, and I actually love my nonprofit people, we are always willing to share everything. So when I said she has sent me a list of resources that is out of this world that would have taken years to put together about people that she's willing to connect with our community, I mean it. And you can literally see that, you know, she does consider Iowa home and is looking at how can we change some of the very things that we're all here working on right now. And so Kysha, your last slide was an excellent lead into one of our first questions. And from the data you collected, and again, a good thing, when we met, you actually dove into the data in Iowa and what we're looking at. And I shared with you several things we're working on. Have you been to a similar community or seen something in a similar community where they were able to galvanize to address some of these things? And can you share, I saw the 8 principles, but maybe even get ideal specific, right? So that people can have an idea or concepts about how to move some of these principles forward.
Sure. So as I said earlier, you'll hear data coming from me a lot. You got to start with the data. And so as we work with organizations, we have to say, what does the data tell you? What do you know? And sometimes that reveals gaps of what you don't know. And so when we work with communities, it's starting there, then creating incremental strategies around that or milestone approaches that provide results along the way that feed into a larger goal or outcome. And so starting with the data is going to be key. And then disaggregating that data to a level where you can confirm or learn more about what you thought was real, or to identify any what we call leaks in the system. A leak could be at the recruitment level, completion, it could be during training, retention on the job. So identifying where are the gaps occurring in my particular system or program, and then target specific solutions around that. And so one of the ways we've used this approach is we partnered with GARE. I don't know if folks have heard about them. They're a division, I think they're I don't know if there's a partnership or not, but it's kind of like a division with Race Forward, and GARE stands for the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And we partnered with them in Philadelphia on one of the cohorts that I mentioned with community-based organizations with Improving Practices and Outcomes team. And we integrated their racial equity toolkit into our continuous improvement model. And it was a natural kind of fit really with our process, where we say, again, start with the data, look at the big goals that you have, and then defining where those leaks in that system are. And how do you define those leaks? It's looking at the data, but then also talking beyond your normal circle. How do I connect with other organizations or other folks that influence the outcomes that I'm seeing now? Do I need to speak with educational institutions? Do I need to speak with the transportation authority? Like, what's impacting the outcomes that I'm having? And how can we have conversations to create solutions around that? And then we test some things, we create strategy, test it, and then you kind of do it all over again. And so those are the models that's our approach and how we go into effective solution making with organizations. But I also know that GARE has worked in Dubuque, and they've created Inclusive Dubuque. And so maybe that might be a connection point with folks to talk about GARE. GARE's worked, I lived in Michigan too, and I know they've worked in Grand Rapids where I lived and done some great work. And so those are some national organizations that can come to you and support the work that you're doing. Another way that we look at solution, again, is pointing the finger at us. Sometimes in the workforce space, we think that's everybody else has an issue with D&I or R&I. Or being exclusive. We look at, again, what are we doing? How do we do our work? What are the policies and frameworks that we operate that might be perpetuating racism? And so I do want to point out a really good article by Claire Minson. Maybe I'll put it, and I can send it to you after. I might better just quickly put it in the chat. And we've used this as a driver to conversation internally as well, because it does talk through the workforce policy that has specifically excluded Black and Brown people in this country. And then how do we as workforce professionals help to eradicate any legacies of that going forward? And so I had mentioned like the Fair Wage Act of the 1930s, which set our minimum wage act. It excluded agricultural and domestic workers. Again, it's the 1930s, who were predominantly agricultural or domestic workers. Same as the Opportunity Act of 1964. There were a lot of exclusions of the Wagner-Pfizer Act of 33. All of those excluded particular populations of people, and there's legacies of that impact still occurring. And so we're looking to say, how can we be anti-racist and help go against those sorts of workforce policies? So there are a couple of things that I highlight in response to your question.
Someone had a great question in the chat too. We see a lot of the states that are struggling, right? And we know a lot of them actually are in the Midwest. You had industrialization and then deindustrialization and some other historical things. Who do you see out there that is doing this well, like on a state level or even a community level? Or is there someone that, and again, this is a forever journey, right? Sometimes we don't even call it journey because we know it's a continuum. This is something that we'll always have to work on when it comes to hearing the voices and honoring the lived experiences of marginalized populations. But who would you say they're starting to get it right? What communities, what states would you say have some innovative things in place that are starting to get it right?
And I think it's coming from it from a couple of different ways. I don't know, like when you say this, but there are some states and workforce systems or communities that are really addressing access to like education and doing some very compelling things. There are some that are doing things around apprenticeships that are providing access to jobs. There are some that are focusing on high school retention. So there's, I think, folks doing things at different angles. Like I think the state of Michigan is really good with their Promise programs, which support access to college for high school graduates. You have folks in the South, like where I'm at, who are really big, like South Carolina, with state apprenticeship programs and really good with connecting with industry. You also, I think, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, there's some others, a lot of states in the South who are been innovative. And I don't know if Iowa does this. Does it use state lottery funds to support college scholarships? Does Iowa do that?
That is a great question. I believe we do, but I'll double check.
Okay.
Mhm.
So those again are great opportunities where I see college X. Yes. Okay, cool. So those are, so I think it's folks coming in states coming at it from all different angles. Right now, I couldn't tell you somebody who's came at it from every angle and is like they've got it solved in every way. I'd have to do a little bit more research, but usually it's like somebody advancing in a piece of the ecosystem in the workforce space and doing that really well. So I can't just come up with a particular state or community doing everything well.
Okay, great. So we have an opportunity. If you're in Iowa, we got an opportunity to change some of those stereotypes about us and actually be one of the people that are doing most of, nobody does everything well. That would.
I think you froze, Joy. I don't know if it's me or you. I think it's Joy, because I see somebody, I see Ty, okay. See Joy froze. Okay, you froze for a second.
Okay, I'm sorry. Am I back?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to know about pushback. When you say we need to lead with race and things like that, it can be very, right now, we're way two different extreme ends of the spectrum. And so, no, for me, again, it's workforce, it's economic driven. Everybody should be able to get behind that. But from your lens, how do you deal with when you receive pushback? What are the things that you say?
Right. So as I mentioned, we've worked with all 50 states over these last decades. And in the last 15 years since I've been at CSW, I think I've seen more pushback or hesitancy from states because of the pushback and banning of CRT, critical race theory. And so, for example, we're working with a cohort of 17 community colleges across the country in a program called ACE-UP. And it's focused particularly on strengthening the capacity of community colleges to address equity gaps and meet the skill development needs of their industry partners. And so we're helping those colleges create equity plans for themselves as well as in partnership with their industry partners. We've got colleges that are on the state ban as a part of that community, that initiative. In Iowa, I know is one state that has banned that in the schools. You've got, it's probably about 8 states now that have banned. There's about 20 more coming with bills that are moving through the state legislature or have enforcements on in school policies to ban the teaching. So that's going to be more than half of our states in the country. So I know we're going to see it more and more. And so to respond to that, we've created a community of practice for those 17 colleges to come together and talk about what they're doing, how they're circumventing some of this. We're bringing in expert faculty, culture change experts, legal professionals as well, to talk with the schools about what they can do, how they can frame practices where you are seeing a pushback to equity. And I think the biggest response to it is follow what are the benefits? Who will receive benefits from this in terms of, if we don't focus on people of color, populations that I said have been left out and let down, what is your community, your region going to look like if they're not skilled, if they're not ready and advancing into the jobs that are there and those to come? And so I think if you focus on the economic outcomes for a community, those are ways that people can get on board, and you can really just think of the bigger picture. And so we're also talking with funders, and I think they have a pivotal role in this conversation. They have a platform, because funders can direct how systems support and respond to pushback. So funders are saying, this is the first time I've ever seen the Department of Labor put in a requirement for their one of the funds, a national fund that we're working with, for their grantees to include equity planning and an equity metric in their outcome. I've never seen the Department of Labor do that. They might just be testing it. But if a funder can require that, I think that's going to redirect people into thinking about how they engage with and make DEI a priority.
Thank you, Kysha. I appreciate that, because we are Iowa, and I think there was a bill that was out, and thankfully, it didn't go through, but it's a challenge right now when, after 2020, everyone was really kind of united on, okay, this is something that we need to focus on. And now we're at this point of, well, no, we don't want to do those things, or we don't want to have very critical conversations to really move impact forward, and not just impact for people of color. It impacts everyone, right? Like you said, when you look at the outcome, if you don't skill up your current workforce, where does that leave your economic mobility as a community? And so the more we can figure out how that to have that message when we talk to people and say this is not a bipartisan thing. This is not,
Right.
This is about that we want to be a community that everyone can thrive. And it's a part of, if I'm a business owner, I need a workforce that I can hire. And so what is that like? So I love that you share some of the ways in that community practice. We actually have our community college president on here. And so I'm sure we would all want to learn more about like that information and what data comes out of that and anything you can share. And I want to even go even a little bit internally, because I love that you said, we point the finger at ourselves, which a lot of people are unwilling to do. And you said, we looked at our own structures. How did that go? How did you embark upon that journey of saying, we've been around for over 30 years, but now it's time for us to look at how can we even do better?
Right. So we started with really our mission and values, and working with our board members was the biggest part. And so our board, and we're happy to say, is very diverse. Our board is 70% people of color. We try to match, which is over the national numbers for that. Because we're a national organization, we can't pinpoint a state or city to our board representation or our staff representation. So we just look nationally. And so one of the things as we worked with them in creating our key performance indicators was making sure that we had an equity metric as a part of that. And so we started with thinking, how do we talk about ourselves, and how are we being intentional about certain in our language about our focus? Before, I think we were just shining away and just saying vulnerable populations or this and that. We did not call out race explicitly in any of our values or our mission. And so that was the first thing that we did. We did that. We were explicit in our language. I always talk about disaggregating data and targeting solutions. We can't do that if we just talk generally and broadly. So you have to be specific. And so that was one of the first things that we did. And then we went deeper into thinking about, as I mentioned, our structure of the organization and making sure that we had the right people to lead the work. And we changed up the way that we did our hiring. And that wasn't just saying we're only going to hire people of color and disregard any other thing about their skills. It wasn't, it was making sure that our applicant pool was diverse. And so again, I mentioned a lot of our recruitment just came from a couple of sources, which was not diverse. And so we changed that up and thought about that. And even before that, as we created the job postings, we did like with the state of Alabama, which was after the work that we did, but we thought about, well, what are the essential skill sets needed for the job? Are there pieces in here that just are just carryovers because it's been in there? You know, like, let's really evaluate this and make sure we have the right competencies in place and speak about it from a skills-based point of view versus degree. So you'll notice we don't have any job postings up now, but we will. We will have one really soon, a senior research associate. So that's coming, but you'll notice we don't put degrees in our job descriptions. And I have very high caliber team members. I do have some PhDs. Most people do have higher education degrees, but it's not a requirement. We want to know what you can do, what you say you can do, and you've demonstrated it. And I think more employers, you'll find our candidate pools like tripled because of that. Diversity among that tripled because we just spoke from it from a point of competencies. We're not looking for, did you get the degree at, you know, the top 10 schools or whatever. We want to know, show me your experience, what you've done. And so that was another big start. We also created some tools to evaluate the work that we're doing. So we created some filter tools to say, is REI centered? How? At what level? And so before we enter into work or agree to partner or respond to an RFP, it has to pass the threshold of that tool in order for us to even enter into that work with a partner or conceptualize that with the funder. And so those are a couple of things that come high to my mind. Oh, the other thing I just mentioned is the wages. We post wages, the wage range on our job descriptions as well, which is key. We don't want guessing games. We don't want anybody feeling like they've been shortchanged. We don't want somebody coming in and thinking, are they being paid more? And there's bias that can creep in. And so we have a wage range that we establish for each position. Folks know it's seen on the job description. We know it when we negotiate, and it just makes things a lot more easier and a lot more fair.
I love that you said that, because I'm always, whenever I work with clients, I'm always having to say, do you know about what you want to pay the person that you're going to hire? They say, yes. Why aren't you posting it? Well, no, it saves you time, and your candidate pool will increase right away just by you posting.
Right. Why
That
not? What are you hiding? Why not? It reduces turmoil inside the organization as folks are guessing, and it helps you plan your budget. If I know this is what's set aside for that position in my budget for that type of position, I can budget that really clearly, and there's no, questions or guesses about that. It just makes it so much easier.
I love to, we talked a little bit earlier, and you touched on this earlier about people and hiring and what you all are doing too. When you're working with a company or you're working with a state, right? Have you ever gotten that, well, you know what? I just hire the best person for the job, regardless of race or gender, and not the understanding that even the implication of that, you're not looking at that, what that could entail. Have you ever gotten that? And how do you navigate that, right? Especially from your lens. Again, you're working with all these states, you work with all of the states. And so you still want to keep that relationship strong. And this work is important to you, right? And so how do you navigate when you're in those rooms of people that challenge you and saying, we're going to have a race focus, we're going to remove educational requirements, and what they hear is not what is said, right? Like you just communicating skills-based is basically you showing me actually what you can do, and not that you can study and you can take a test and earn a degree.
Right.
Although I have a degree and I know it's not easy to get, But just saying that there's something to be said that's a little bit different about having that applicable knowledge, right? And so how do you address people that say, hey, you know what? We're keeping our 4-year degree. We just want to hire the best candidate. We don't care about race. What's your conversation for those individuals or those organizations that do that, especially government agencies, because they tend to feel like they have less flexibility?
Well, I have a number of responses. This might kind of intertwine with, I know, something else you wanted to get into, but I think it kind of meshes together. So we know there's a worker nationally. I mean, I think everybody knows there's a worker shortage happening everywhere, in particular in certain sectors. And so I just came from a conference in DC, which is a workforce board conference, and the issues around having workers in the skilled trades is a tremendous issue that folks have to focus on. Like, should have been 30 years ago, but now, it's in front of us. Biden has the infrastructure bill that was just passed. It's 1.5, no, let me get it right. $1.2 trillion invested into infrastructure jobs, and that's clean water, public transit, railway, power grids, roads, all that high-speed internet that's needed to make sure that our country has up-to-date infrastructure going forward. And so we're in desperate need to maintain and advance that essential infrastructure. It's going to give us about 1.5 million jobs, is what I've seen, each year over the next 10 years. That is a lot of jobs. So I'm giving some of this backdrop to the question that I am going to directly answer, but I think it's important to understand that the shortage of those skilled trade jobs is impacted in a number of ways. The birth rates definitely have dropped for working age people. It's dropped tremendously for the white population, who is the majority of the working population right now as well. There's going to be a deficit is expected of 6 million workers in the next 6-7 years. It's not far. And so the demand is great. And so the question is, how are we going to fill those jobs? People of color are less than 3% of many of the skilled trades. That's a great workforce that we're not tapping into and that we're missing out on. Women, again, another segment of the workforce that we're missing out when we talk about skilled trades. And we've got to be able to tap into those groups if we want to be able to fill those that demand. And so when I think about the question, we just hired the best, traditionally, who has been in skilled trades? What policies have been in place that put people in skilled trades in certain union jobs? I know my uncle was the manager at the water plant. I started coming in on the summers, and so I got the job. It was a lot of that happening. And so to say everyone has biases, and it'll be continuous, subconsciously or consciously at play, and it creeps into your candidate selection process. So first of all, just saying hiring the best person on the job, regardless of gender or race, it's just not true, because bias is inevitably a part of that. Even as we look at hiring people, folks with names that sound like mine, and my name is on one at the top of the list. When you have a name, it's Kysha, but people say Kysha. The opportunity for getting that job drops by 50% right off the bat for someone with a name like mine. White sounding names get 50% more callbacks than African American sounding names. So that happens. The best and brightest could just be dropped out of that pool just by their name. One of the reasons in our job application process, we strike all names. It's not even in there. Your number, actually, when we see when you're part of the candidate group scoring. Then based on what criteria, again, who is making up the qualifications for the job? What's really needed? Is it competency based? Is it based on a job description that has been here for 40 years? So many jobs have to be revamped, and the whole part of, do we really need a degree, needs to be called into question. The jobs that I'm talking about, those infrastructure jobs, many of them, vast majority of them don't need a 4-year degree. Some don't even need a 2-year degree. Then having a diversity metric or hiring strategy. So I say it's different than having a diversity hire. It's not about tokenism. It's about correcting for the bias that I was just talking about and attracting and promoting qualified candidates. You want to ensure that the best candidate for the job is there while ensuring you reach and cast your net wide enough so that you're connecting with a pool that has diverse candidates. And then candidates who fit those competencies you're seeking. You can't change your organization if your pool is always the same. And then, as I've always said, allow for the data to lead you. And I just want to give you a couple stats. Though people of color are about 40% of the general population, that'll creep up to majority very soon. The majority of the US workforce is white at 78%. That is unbalanced. Americans with disabilities are employed at 2.5 times, Americans without disabilities are employed at 2.5 times the rate of Americans with disabilities. Women make up 58% of the workforce, but only 7% of Fortune 500 CEOs. Men are twice as likely to be hired regardless of the gender of the manager. And 46% of LGBTQ workers feel they have to hide parts of their identity in order to get a job. So it's not, again, it's the biases are creeping in. It's not, you're not always getting the best and the brightest candidate when we have numbers that look like this. It's just not true.
Great info. That is so, I didn't, and we didn't even touch on too, like just but you started to lean into that people that have different abilities, that is a wonderful opportunity to fill needs. I mean, we started a pre-apprenticeship program with Hawkeye College. And what I found was my high school students that maybe had IEPs or things of that nature, they did amazing in this pre-apprenticeship programming for CNC, right? So something that is a workforce skill that we need, something that is a good paying opportunity, something that can really set them up and company up. And it just was a miss. And we just happened to say, you know what, let's try it with the student. We didn't, we were working on making sure that there was people there. We had another student that had some reading issues and the student actually couldn't read, but if you gave allowances for, okay, somebody gave them the instruction, was an amazing student, came to class all the time, was on time, was one of the best students in the class for our pilot program. And so I think that we're in this place where we have to think outside the box, not only about how we expand the ecosystem, but also about how we're providing services and opportunities within the particular organizations as well. So that I love that you touched on that as well too. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I know we've got about 5 minutes left, and Kysha, I can ask you questions like all day and connect all day. And then I love too, you always share such good information. So I'll make sure that everybody gets a recap of not only Kysha's presentation, but some of the other information she's already sent to me. And then anything else that you've mentioned this morning that you like me to share out with people, I'll definitely do that as well. But so I don't see another question in the chat. So what I will do is say, if I'm an organization or I'm a public institution or I'm an educational institution, where would I start, right? Like a lot of times I think when people want to do this work and want to make an impact, once they start researching it, it feels so daunting that people can be paralyzed on how to move forward. And so I know earlier you said lean into the data, right? But is there something else you would give people on this call that would say, where should we start?
Yeah, this is a good point. And I was going to leave a question with everybody too, and I'll put that there for folks to think about. So when we talk about this degrees and credentials, that's near to me. 70% of Iowans don't have a BA. What do you do? 30% do, 70% don't. What are you going to do with that population if industry says it requires a BA? It's not going to get there. So I'd say, yes, start with the data. Having the data disaggregated so you know where to target and pinpoint. What was that? Yeah, 70% of Iowans don't have a BA, exactly. So knowing where to start, not disaggregating the data, and then thinking you have to solve everything at once, I think is where people get kind of stifled. In our continuous improvement model, we talk about what can be done by next Tuesday. Where can you start the conversation? Who do I need to reach out to get more information about this issue that we're having? How do I reach out beyond my traditional and comfort level of who I always talk to? Who else might have the solution? Go to the people who are experiencing the issue. You'll find solutions there. And so those are some of the things I would say to get you. Just start, reach out beyond what you're normally using in your networks. Elevate the voices of the people who are impacted by the work that you're doing, and talk to them and find solutions there.
Kysha, thank you, thank you, thank you. Chris just dropped some information about locally a disability employment network we have that partners and supports people. So always looking for partners. Chris has done some amazing work for us here. And so again, Kysha, I want to say that this is session 1, right? That we got to do a session 2 to get more people to come back and hear some more and even dive deeper into some of the initiatives and the work that you're doing. So thank you on behalf of One Cedar Valley and our community on Friday. Thank you for everybody who jumped on the call as well too. We just really, really appreciate it. Again, when I send out some of these links and follow up, I'll also have a copy of this this presentation this morning, and also the PDF of Kysha's presentation. And again, she's just a wonderful resource. She is in and she is of and connected to the community. So any time that you want to reach out to her and ask any more questions, please feel free to do. I would definitely connect you. And thank you so much. We're at 12:57. It's Friday. And so I just want to give everybody a few minutes of their time to enjoy their Friday. But again, we've got some work to do, but we have some amazing partners and advocates that are going to help us along this journey. So everyone have a great, great day, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you,
a great-
Kysha. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.